The global Nemesis feature in Xenoblade X is probably one of the more notable multiplayer features included in the game, where basically the entire world comes together to fight a raid boss type of enemy. There are two of these super bosses in Xenoblade X, Telethia, Plume, and Yggralith 0, and I would love if they added more in the future somehow. Essentially, these enemies have a resource known as Resurrection Points, or RP, which denotes how many total health bars they have, and the goal of the player base is to reduce these health bars to 0. You can play in a lobby of up to 4 players, so if you have friends, it can be a lot of fun to strategize and come up with ways to reduce RP as much as possible, since RP is around currently 50 and 60% for the current 2 Nemesis. In this video, I wanted to give a general overview of the Global Nemesis for players who may not have tried the feature yet, show off builds that will help you in fighting the Global Nemesis enemies, and talk a bit in detail about those builds and how you can optimize further. If you enjoy guide content like this on Xenoblade X and would like to see more, please do be sure to subscribe to the channel because it does help me out so much. I'm getting very close to 100,000 subscribers and would really love to hit that milestone. And don't worry, that skill guide is coming soon. I was just dragged into this yesterday and didn't have time to do everything for it. But it's soon, I promise. Let's get into it. So the general way the Nemesis feature works is that you have a level 30 Nemesis and a level 60 Nemesis. The level 30 is the Telethia Plume, and level 60 is Yggralith 0. In the Wii U version, the Telethia would spawn twice a week and run away if not defeated, but as of now it hasn't ran away yet when I thought it would, so this is probably changed in this version. Yggralith spawns as squad tasks are completed globally, and the faster this is done, the faster Yggralith will spawn, which means earlier in the game's lifespan the more often it'll likely spawn to fight. Additionally, both Nemesis enemies have spawned with 1 million RP. I am expecting this to increase as more and more players get into post-game and optimize because it's actually a pretty low amount. Even with attempts being limited to only 10 in this version, that's still not a lot, and a few well-built groups could easily take it out by themselves. With 9 attempts, my group got 200k in a week with a week 1 build that isn't even super optimal yet, which is 1/5 of the total HP. Plus, there's potentially a really broken damage over time strategy in the works that could easily ruin it for the entire player base, especially if these numbers aren't pumped up more. I do also remember Yggralith gaining more RP in the Wii U version over time. Essentially, the goal of every player should be to take at least 100 RP from the Nemesis enemy for the maximum amount of rewards, and if the Nemesis is defeated, everyone who participated gets some very nice rewards, including potentially unique materials that can be used in crafting and aren't available through any other methods aside from tickets. If your goal is to just get this 100 RP, that usually isn't too difficult to do. Even solo, if you have a proper build, you can probably go into these with a melee weapon of your choosing, and dual guns for access to Ghostwalker if you just want a convenient, easy way, and as long as you have all the generally useful skills and decent augments, easily get yourself this in 10 attempts since you have 8 minutes per attempt. So you have 80 minutes just to get 100 health bars, which is not difficult at all. When I was doing some test runs on the Telethia Plume, all I had to make sure I equipped was Nullify Ether Reflect, since I was using an Ether weapon, and with some Appendage Crusher augments and the right skills like Core Crusher and Aura Assault, I could very easily take multiple hundreds of RP in a single run. I'll be covering weapon builds in later videos, so you can look forward to that. This video is going to be focused more so on general team strategies for Global Nemesis and how they work, and how you can get a lot of RP per run with the right sets, as our goal is to kill the Nemesis, and the more people that are on board with these strategies, the easier that will be. The general principles behind getting a lot of RP when fighting a Global Nemesis is ideally running 3 DPS and 1 support. The support is actually extremely important for maximizing the RP gain of the other players, and even if you don't have 3 DPS, you can still do this with 2 DPS or maybe even 1 DPS. It also generally just makes the fight significantly safer. Additionally, you need a couple skells set up for a few things at the start of these fights if you want to be as optimal as possible. These are going to be the Break Skell and the Ether Resistance Down Skell. The Break Skell is essentially a skell optimized to break appendages of Nemesis enemies, and for Yggralith in particular, destroying the chest and exposing the much weaker core inside for everyone to hit. Make sure not to break every appendage if fighting Telethia either, as the DPS players with Core Crusher are going to want to target an appendage. The person doing this should also have the purple soul voice equipped that gives +2 to the debuff tier when breaking an appendage. The second skill will apply the F-Wave effect Ether Resistance Down, which will apply Ether Resist Down 6 to the enemy. Now, there are multiple F-Waves, so you need to find the one that inflicts Ether Resistance Down. This is the only purpose of this skill and should be used on the Soul Voice. Additionally, this skill is run with 23 debuff extension augments on all of the weapon slots possible. This will extend the debuff to all 8 minutes of the run, and yes, this actually works. Now the Nemesis enemies will be taking increased damage from all Ether damage sources for all 8 minutes of the run. As you may have heard multiple times by now, Ether is the best damage type in the game because of the skill Core Crusher. This skill will allow you to not break appendages when targeting them as long as you are using Ether damage, and it has an absolutely massive damage multiplier. This is especially helpful for something like Yggralith, which has a very weak appendage with a very weak hardness tier when you break the chest, because it allows you to continuously do massive damage to the enemy without it breaking. This makes it a very important skill for doing as much damage as possible. With that out of the way, let's talk a bit about the setup that you want to have for this, especially the support setup first, since that is going to be extremely important to doing as much damage as possible. So you definitely want to find a player that can pull this off and has the ability to do this if you're trying to get as much damage on the Nemesis as you can. First of all, big thank you to my friend Void Filled Heart for being the support in our run and also sending me this footage so I could use it. Thank you so much, buddy. I do appreciate you a lot. Now, typically, the job of the support is going to be two things. One is just kind of granting TP to everyone, and then also providing the topple and providing the Howling Soul buff, the new buff in this game, which is extremely strong and powerful. This means you're ideally going to be running shield and sniper rifle, since Howling Soul is on Sniper, and you can get a Topple Art Wild Down on your shield. Outside of that, you absolutely want to make sure you have the Grand Procession skill and 5 Overdrive Gain TP Augments, or something that just maxes out to where you can just spam the Overdrive button, and you're able to grant TP to the entire party. Void himself also has Overdrive Count Up Augments on his weapon, just to make sure he can get max Overdrive pretty much instantly, and he's able to just spam that button to grant the other 3 of us TP immediately. Now, as long as he is able to keep the Topple up, and as long as he is able to grant us the really powerful Howling Soul buff, which gives us extra melee attack, extra potential if you're running a potential build, then he has done his job. Those are the main things that he absolutely needed to do, and so we are basically set at this point. So now it's just a matter of keeping our TP up, and also making sure that we have melee soul voices when we have the ability to do that, so we're able to do even more damage. It may not be as flashy, but it's a very important role, and is probably the main reason we can get as much RP as we do with the other 3 characters that we have. And like I said, just one person running this can also help another person deal significantly more DPS than they would be able to solo. So that is something else to keep in mind. It just makes everything a lot easier overall. For the DPS setup, I want you to keep in mind this is just kind of a week 1 experimental build. This is absolutely not going to be the absolute best way to take RP, especially with some of the new strategies that are being cooked up right now with some of the really broken things you can do with the new art Hercules Blow. But regardless, this is a good setup to have, mainly just stacking a bunch of melee attack, 1 appendage crusher, and a bunch of aura rapid cooldown. You can get 4 slot dual guns from doing chapter 13 and talking to a certain character in that section of the game. But regardless, that is something to keep in mind. You also want to run these same general skills on all of these, and if you're doing Telethia instead, you're probably going to want to run appendage crushers on your weapon instead of bunch of melee attack up, because you're going to want to at least hit 5 appendage crushers total instead of just 1. So that is something to keep in mind if you are doing Telethia instead. But regardless, a lot of the same general strategies can apply. You also want Nullify Ether Reflect if you are fighting Telethia solo, because you're not going to have someone to topple it. So you're going to want to make sure you have Nullify Ether Reflect, because you can randomly just reflect all of your Ether attacks, and you want to make sure that you can hit that without there being too many issues here. Now, against Telethia in particular, like I said, Appendage Crusher is going to be the main ways, which means Potential is probably going to be a better build than Melee Attack. I didn't really have a Potential build set up at the time that I was doing this initially, so we just did some experimentation with Melee Attack, and it was still able to easily get some pretty big numbers. I think we got about 5,000 RP on a lot of these runs, which isn't too terrible at the very least. Regardless, though, the general strategy for a lot of this is just going to be the exact same. I run the exact same art palette here as I was doing for Yggralith, at least for week 1. Now, the old strategy for Telethia Plume involved using Blossom Dance, and I would not be surprised that ends up being the case here, because you want Appendage Crushers against Telethia Plume because of the hardness tier that it has on the appendages, and that means you're not going to be able to stack as much melee attack, which means obviously you're going to need to do more damage with TP arts instead. Now, on Yggralith, you're able to do a more melee attack focused build and do a massive amount of damage. You probably saw those damage caps at the beginning of the video with Hercules Blow, and that is because, well, you're able to stack a lot more melee attacks. You only need 1 Appendage Crusher, so it can end up being more useful than the Potential build, which relies on Blossom Dance instead, which normally your Potential stat goes on your armor augments instead. So depending on the situation, you can have a build that is better than another build. With some of the calculations we were doing with Knock and Shock, it is very possible that Hercules Blow ends up being really, really broken with that, and you can do some massive amounts of damage over time, so I would not be surprised that ends up being the strategy, and just a little bit here, which means the build would not actually change too much for melee characters. That said, I also wouldn't be surprised if the optimal build ends up being Potential in the long run, especially if something like that gets removed, just because, you know, well, that was the strategy in the past. It was Gatling Gun Hellfire spam for Yggralith at the very least, so that could be an option at the very least as well. Because the main problem with Hercules Blow is, while it is powerful, while you can damage cap with it very, very easily with the right setups here, and now you can see I'm just hitting 80+ million basically every time I use it, it is a slow art. That is the main weakness of it. It takes like 5 seconds to come out, basically. And so that is something to keep in mind when you are using Hercules Blow. That is its main negative and drawback. But regardless, it's a really powerful art in the melee build where you stack a bunch of melee attack with Longsword. Is really, really powerful because of that and Howling Soul now, which is two of the new arts that were granted to you by one of the new characters in the game, and they're both ridiculously broken. As far as the actual strategy in the fight themselves, when I had a better setup for Yggralith compared to Telethia, what we did was run Aura Rapid cooldown on all of our armor slots and a bunch of melee attack on the weapon slots, as you've already seen. Aura Rapid cooldown basically allows all of our cards to instantly come to their tier 1 cooldown after you activate offensive stance. So basically what we do is we would start Overdrive once we got out of the skells, and we'd have our support feed us TP, right? Void would be feeding us TP. We would use Primer into 0-0, and this would basically just grant us a bunch of count. So we would get a bunch of overdrive count, 20 per every time you did it, and if you have like overdrive gain count on one of your weapon traits, you don't even have to waste a slot on that. You can just spam overdrive to get to max count, and that can be really useful as well. We would make sure not to target the core when we activated overdrive. Since overdrive activation now does damage, do not target the core. You do not want to break the core because that's where we're going to be doing all of our damage. After that, once you activate overdrive, you can swap to the core, spam primer 0-0, and then you are able to just kind of keep targeting that the rest of the way. And once you reach 100 count, the strategy was offensive stance, combat limbo, and the combat limbo would be keep our buffs frozen. So we would keep the Howling Soul that we got, and we would keep offensive stance the entire time. And basically all we would do from there is just kind of do our rotation, and we would refresh combat limbo every 30 seconds since it lasts about 37 seconds or so. Our rotation was typically Hercules Blow, True Stream Edge, Tornado Blade, Hercules Blow, True Stream Edge, Tornado Blade, Hercules Blow, True Stream Edge into Combat Limbo, and that would give us a perfect cooldown to go right back into Hercules Blow again, which is our most powerful art. Now, once again, this art is kind of slow, so it still may not even be optimal to spam this compared to just using the other melee arts, just because of how slow it is, but it does do a lot of damage, so it really, really just depends. This will be something that we probably calculate more in the future, but for a week 1 build, this was pretty good, and we were getting about 20 to 27k every single RP run we did, depending on the mistakes, and if we were able to actually get the ether down 6 at the start of the fight and stuff like that. So that is just the general setup and strategy. Make sure you keep Combat Limbo up. You do not need to use Ghostwalker if you have a support, because, well, the support is going to keep it toppled the entire time, so you're never really in danger of getting hit if that happens, which is very nice to have. Also, make sure you're refreshing Overdrive for duration, since you're not using many green and blue arts to refresh that duration. And you can cancel Hercules Blow animation with the Overdrive activation, which I did a couple times, but it really just depends on the situation. A lot of times I would just do it after using Tornado Blade, since you have to wait a little bit for the Hercules Blow cooldown to come back right after that anyway. But regardless, Hercules Blow, very, very broken new art. Howling Soul, very, very broken new art, and, you know, it just kind of ruins the balance of X even further, especially if the DOT strat works where we can hit damage cap DOTs, which we're looking into right now even. We have one more attempt specifically to look into that, and if it is just as broken as I think it is, I might try to call attention to it for Monolith to kind of nerf it, because I think that might ruin the global Nemesis fights for everyone, honestly. But we'll see about that when we get there, at the very least. Regardless, as long as you have support, these fights are not too difficult. As long as you have a good setup, it's very easy to just take a lot of RP, and if more players are able to get a good, strong setup, it'll be easier to make sure everyone gets the rewards for these as long as they've taken their 100 TP, right? Or their 100 RP, I should say. As I also mentioned, you can run potential-based setups here. Blossom Dance is not a bad setup, especially for the Telethia, where you have to run Appendage Crusher. The strategy for that was something we did in the past as well, where you would alternate into Blossom Dance as much as you could, because that was your absolute strongest art in the past. Blossom Dance is really nice because it can ignore all attribute resistances, meaning it always does that very consistent damage against pretty much every single enemy, which is one thing that Hercules Blow does not have, despite its ridiculously high art scaling, which makes it very easy to hit damage cap with. Howling Soul will also buff your potential as well, but if you are running potential-based builds, you're going to want to have Mind Storm also, so you are going to need a different support setup because of that. So that is one thing that you are going to have to keep in mind to make sure that you are getting the most benefit out of that as well. And of course, if Hellfire ends up being the strategy, you're also going to want all the potential buffs possible, so that is something to keep in mind also. Regardless, though, it's looking like Hercules Blow may end up being the strongest thing, again, depending on how the DOT strategy works, as I said earlier. Regardless, though, it really is just kind of that simple. Not too hard to keep this strategy going. Very, very easy to get a lot of damage. And, well, if you do, like I said, it's very easy to take off a lot of the RP of the Nemesis enemy. Like I said, we were able to very, very easily take 200k of the 1 million. And I think we're all 4 top of the leaderboard by an absolute mile now. And Would be nice to get the rewards for these. You do get a golden Yggralith heart from these, which allows you to buy an Ares 90 if you haven't bought it with tickets. So that's something really nice. And like I said earlier, if you have a solo player, you don't have anyone to play with, it is still very easy to get the required 100 RP just by playing by yourself and doing a general Ghostwalker strategy. These enemies don't have too many multi-hits that can eat through Ghostwalker really easily, so it is not too difficult. You just want to make sure you have the Nullify, Ether, Reflect for Telethia, and if you are fighting the Yggralith 0, you probably want like an Ares 90 so you can break the chest appendage, so you can target the weak point, so you can do a lot of damage to that, and make sure you hit that 100 RP without too much trouble at all. I am also, in this general melee build against Telethia I did by myself, I ran Overdrive Gain TP instead of Aura Rapid Cooldown as my weapon armor augments, since I wasn't running a potential build and didn't need potential up. And that is also an easy way just to kind of make sure you can keep your Overdrive up and just kind of get max very, very easily. And even though I was running Appendage Crushers and didn't have much melee attack, I was still able to take multiple hundreds of health bar per attempt, even though this was like a day 3 build and everything like that. It really didn't matter too much. These are not too terribly difficult fights. They are pretty easy to get 100 RP even on your own, and I hope this guy was able to help you accomplish that if you were watching. And I also hope it was helpful if you were trying to set up a group to do some runs like this as well. If you need a group, maybe you can join a Discord server. There's plenty of Xenoblade Discord servers around that are looking to probably recruit some players. I have a Discord server in my description. Well, I haven't really been using it as a recruitment point, but maybe you can find people in my Xenoblade X channel or something like that. Maybe people will start asking if they see this video. I have no idea, but regardless, there's other Xenoblade Discords that are even larger than my server if you want to try to join those and find people to play with and maybe try to set up a build to take out RP quicker. Regardless, though, I do hope that they'll add more RP to the Nemesis in the future so they don't go down super quickly once everyone starts getting their optimized post-game builds, because like I said, if a week 1 build for my group is able to take 1/5 Nemesis HP bars, then that could really invalidate a lot of the content for a lot of players that might be looking forward to some of the post-game content, so I'd really hate to see that. So I really, really hope they do something about that, and I assume they're paying at least some attention, so I'm hoping that that is going to be the case. Regardless, I do think that will cover it for me, so if you did learn something from this video and did enjoy the video, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends who are new to the game and getting into post-game, and of course, be sure to come back for my future guides. I will be making that skill guide soon, I promise. Now, thank you guys so much for watching, have a wonderful rest of your day, and hopefully I will see you back here soon. Also, huge shout out to Xander and Lawrence for being the other 2 people who played with me. They are also extremely good at the game, and also very helpful in doing these runs, so thank you guys so much. I do appreciate y'all as well.